Hey guys, tonight we travel far beyond time zones and to-do lists to a place where the air smells faintly of rosewater saffron and something musky you can't quite name. You're not in your bed anymore. You're drifting along the arid slopes of the Iranian plateau toes, brushing against a dusting of dry loam that once fed empires. The stars above are pin-sharp, the kind you don't get in cities anymore, and beneath your feet, just inches below the surface, lie secrets. Forgotten seeds, whispering roots, the ghost vegetables of ancient Persia. You probably won't survive this, by which I mean the intense craving for pickled turnips that's about to hit around midnight. And fair warning, one of these vegetables may or may not have contributed to a royal scandal involving a garlic-stuffed crown roast. But we'll get to that. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, I'd love to know what country and time are you listening from right now. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background. Hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge across the crumbled gravel path, once smooth marble laid by artisans summoned from every corner of the empire. A warm breeze carries whispers through skeletal trees, some wild fig, others long-dead pistachio. You kneel down near a half-buried cornerstone of Persepolis, the Achaemenid capital, and run your fingers over glyphs that speak of harvests, gods of fertility, and just perhaps a forgotten variety of squash that historians still can't agree ever existed. Yes, that's right. A squash mystery. Already things are getting serious. You walk deeper into the ruins, but they don't feel ruined exactly. The stone retains warmth from the day, and the ground emits the faintest perfume of cumin and something green like freshly cracked coriander seed. In ancient times, this was no dry desert. Persia's elite engineered elaborate underground aqueducts called qanats to irrigate their lands. These weren't trickling brooks either. They were full-blown stealth rivers channeling melted snow from the mountains hundreds of kilometers away. Thanks to this marvel, what should have been sand and stone became lush groves, thriving orchards and vegetable gardens designed not only for sustenance, but for beauty. Gardens paradiaida in Old Persian, the word that gave us paradise, weren't just backyards. They were cosmic diagrams, metaphors, living scrolls written in green and gold. And hidden beneath those rows of symmetry and sacred geometry, a rainbow of vegetables, many now extinct or radically transformed. You pass a spot where once stood a series of raised beds, likely terraced with brick and lined with mint. Inscriptions suggest this section grew kingly roots and sleepward leaves, herbs believed to invite vivid dreams. Possibly lettuce, maybe opium poppy. Probably both. A soft crunch draws your attention, a dried fennel stem snapping underfoot. You bend down and find its tiny seeds still encased in brittle husks. Fennel, a favorite among Persians for its sweet anise flavor, was used in both stews and love potions. Rumor had it that if you slipped some into a rival's shoes, they'd fall in love with the next thing they smelled. This was either clever magic or a prank gone wild. Historians still argue whether this qualifies as early biochemistry or poetic mischief. A few steps more, and you reach what must have been a kitchen outpost, an outdoor prep zone. Scattered pottery fragments hint at pickling crocks and fermentation jars. One of the shards glistens oddly. You rub it clean, it's embedded with a black residue. Charred vegetable ash. Likely leek, or maybe something rarer, kashki badamjan, an eggplant mash that still graces Persian tables today, though the ancient version may have used the smaller yellow-white variety of eggplant, now lost to cultivation. Imagine a court cook here, sleeves rolled, slicing onions so strong they brought a general to tears. Or peeling carrots, purple ones. That's right, carrots weren't always orange. Ancient Persian varieties came in deep maroon and soft violet, a palette the Dutch would later manipulate to honor their House of Orange. But for now in this garden the color wheel was unfiltered. You pass a stone trough that once held water and fish. Yes, some Persian gardens included live fish to keep mosquitoes at bay and amuse guests. You imagine yourself sitting on a soft cushion here, sipping mint yogurt drink, while watching carp nibble beneath papyrus. A donkey brays distantly, because of course there's a donkey in this dream. Nearby the soil is darker, enriched possibly by centuries of compost. You crouch, dig a little, and pull up a gnarly root. Parsnip turnip. Hard to say. Ancient Persian cuisine blurred the lines between the two. What's clear is the smell earthy, slightly sweet, and with a hint of camphor. You place it back. No need to disturb the past too much. From this vantage point, you see the garden wasn't just culinary. It was medicinal, ritualistic, even mystical. Plants were chosen for their humoral qualities, hot, cold, moist, dry, and combined like instruments in an orchestra to balance the body. Get it wrong, and you might faint. Get it right, and supposedly you could see into dreams. And in one alcove, surrounded by crumbled mosaic, lies a tiled inscription. You peer closer, tracing the faded lines. To eat from the garden is to hear the earth's whisper. Goosebumps rise. Or maybe it's just a breeze. Either way, something here remembers. And it wants to be known. Somewhere in this very soil, seeds sleep undisturbed for over 2,000 years. And maybe one of them still dreams in color. You brush the dirt from your hands and step softly into what was once the heart of the palace grounds, where the aromas of roasted meats and warm flatbreads would have danced with steam from simmering stews. Tonight, though, the wind carries only silence, and the moon spills a silvery glaze over scattered columns and forgotten corridors. Still, if you listen just right, just tilt your ear into the hush, you can almost hear the clatter of ceramic bowls, the laughter of cupbearers, and the rustle of silk robes as the king's servants moved swiftly from dish to dish. You're entering the great dining hall, not the ceremonial one for visiting dignitaries, but the more intimate, elevated table space for King Darius himself, where he dined not as a god-king with a golden beard, but as a man who liked his lentils cooked slow with a side of pickled garlic. Historians still debate how much of Persian cuisine made it directly onto the king's plate, or whether the royal cooks beautified peasant dishes to suit aristocratic taste. But some evidence from kitchen ledgers inscribed on clay tablets suggests that vegetables were just as prized as the famed lamb or fowl. Take, for instance, the beet. Not our soft, earthy, modern beet, but a more fibrous, spicier ancestor used both as a thickener and a colorant. It turned soups into shades of plum and lentils into pools of garnet. You imagine the king lifting a carved spoon to his lips, closing his eyes to the flavor. It wasn't just about taste, it was symbolism. To eat red was to absorb power. To pair it with sumac, that tart little berry ground into a fine ruby powder, was to invite clarity and decisiveness. You know, just in case he had a war to declare or a cousin to exile before dessert. Now step a little closer to the long, low table made from cypress wood and inlaid with shell. Here's where it gets indulgent. Contrary to popular belief, Persian royalty didn't just stuff themselves with meat. Vegetables weren't the sides, they were the overture. You'd start with a vinegary eggplant stew, layered with dried limes and turmeric. Then a salad of purslane and onions drenched in a syrup made from date molasses, followed by a hot lentil puree spiced with asafoetida, yes, that herb with a name like a Harry Potter sneeze. And here's a quirky one. Historians recently found traces of a sauce in ancient jars made from crushed walnuts, pomegranate juice, and wild celery. basically proto-fesenjan, the dish still beloved today. But back then it may have been used as a dipping sauce for roasted tubers, turnips most likely, since potatoes were still hanging out in South America, waiting to be discovered. Even more fascinating archaeological teams unearthed small lidded clay bowls near the old kitchens, each sealed with beeswax. Inside, pickled ramp bulbs. Ramp, a sort of ancient leek with a bite that could clear a sinus from across the room, was a delicacy reserved for nights when the stars aligned just so. The theory goes that certain vegetables were eaten only under certain constellations to bring balance or ward off nightmares. Again, historians still argue whether this was science astrology or just the royal chef buying time to restock. Now look to your right. That elevated corner was for the spice and garnish trays. Yes, entire trays. Persian cooks weren't shy with embellishments. They'd toss dried rose petals on roasted carrots, mix mint with cucumber in ways that would make a modern spa water look underachieving, and layer yogurt with dill garlic and shredded cucumbers in a bowl of what might have been the earliest masto khyar. And all of this happened before the main course. Dinner was a runway, and vegetables strutted first. As you walk past where a brazier once flickered, you picture a line of servants adding last-minute touches, seared pomegranate seeds tossed in honey or slivered almonds toasted in duck fat. Imagine being the one to garnish the king's plate and accidentally sneeze. That might be your last vegetable-related decision, ever. And yes, there was wine, but not just for sipping. One curious scroll describes a beetroot wine fermented with dates and flecks of dried tamarind, used both as a beverage and a marinade. The fermentation likely came from natural yeast on the skin's accidental chemistry at its finest. Whether it tasted good is another question. One Roman visitor called it vibrant and strange, like drinking rubies and regret. Now let's peek under the table. No, really. Because animals were allowed near the feast, cats especially. They were prized for pest control and frequently pampered. There's even a report of one king whose tabby had its own engraved bronze dish filled nightly with milk and minced vegetables. Whether the cat enjoyed this or just wished it were meat, we'll never know. As you leave the room, you pass a crumbling mural, now just a trace of pigment and plaster. But its subject is unmistakable. A giant cucumber flanked by two dancers, their arms arched like vines. It was likely part of a springtime fertility festival, where the king himself would ceremonially slice the first cucumber of the season. Some say it symbolized abundance. Others say it was just an excuse to wear leafy costumes and drink too much ramp wine. You step back out into the night, and for a moment the scent of the garden returns. Garlic, leek, maybe even that tang of pickled carrot you can't quite place. In the distance, a jackal yips. Or maybe it's just your stomach wondering what happened to that beetroot stew. The gravel crunches softly under your sandals as you drift away from the banquet hall, the ghost of warm stew clinging to your imagination like steam on a cold bowl. The stars seem to have shuffled places while you dined in that memory of opulence. Now they shimmer overhead like seeds scattered from an invisible hand. You follow a winding trail through what remains of a once grand courtyard, and then suddenly you find yourself facing a curious scene, a long raised bed bordered by crumbling stone, strangely well-defined even after millennia. This, you realize, was no ordinary garden plot. This was a battleground. Welcome to the Great Cucumber Wars. That's right, long before the internet gave us keyboard warriors, Ancient Persia had farmers locked in competitive cucumber duels, so dramatic they might as well have aired weekly episodes on clay tablets. One inscription, barely legible in the dim light, boasts of the longest, crispest, most water-rich fruit brought forth from the soil of Media, penned by what appears to be a very confident vegetable merchant with excellent handwriting. Cucumbers in ancient Persia weren't just a snack, they were a matter of regional pride. Provinces competed fiercely over whose soil produced the juiciest specimens. Some royal edicts even encouraged interprovincial cucumber festivals. And lest you think it was all harmless, bragging a scroll uncovered near Susa contains a detailed complaint from a rival grower accusing a neighbor of sabotaging the irrigation ditch and placing bad omens in the melon rows. Classic ancient agricultural trash talk. Historians still argue whether these incidents were metaphorical, ritualistic, or the earliest form of passive-aggressive farming. You crouch by the edge of the bed where wild cucumber vines still struggle to grow thin and pale, like ghosts of their regal ancestors. The ancient cucumbers weren't the bland, watery cylinders you see in grocery stores. These were spiny with slightly bitter skins, often used more for medicine than food. They were believed to cool the body, reduce fever, and according to one overly optimistic clay tablet, banish spirits of sulk and sluggishness. Possibly the first recorded case of a cucumber being used to treat a bad mood. You brush aside some dry leaves and spot fragments of a broken amphora. Someone once stored cucumbers here, pickled perhaps in brine, laced with dill and sumac, or maybe in sweetened vinegar, infused with rose petals. The recipe's lost, but you can practically smell it, tangy, earthy, faintly floral. A pickle with ambition. Back then, pickling wasn't just a preservation method, it was magic. The transformation of a fresh, perishable vegetable into something resilient and long-lasting mirrored the cycles of life, death, and rebirth. Pickled cucumbers became symbolic offerings at certain ceremonies. Some scholars suggest they were even placed in tombs to keep the spirit crisp. It sounds ridiculous until you realize we still bury people with objects they loved. Someone somewhere might have loved pickles that much. Further down the path, a painted relief peeks through ivy. A man in regal garb holds up what can only be a cucumber arched like a crescent moon. His other hand is raised in triumph. The crowd around him appears perplexed. You stare at it and chuckle. Maybe this was the first ever cucumber competition trophy ceremony, or maybe it was just a really enthusiastic harvest day. In one ruined alcove, you find the remains of a judging stand marked with tally stones. Apparently size wasn't everything. Cucumbers were rated on smoothness, shape, color, and the freshness of crunch, according to translated notes. Imagine the ancient judges biting into cold slices under the sun, nodding sagely, while scribes recorded each crunch like sacred scripture. And then, of course, came the melon faction. Melons in ancient Persia were their own drama. Sweet, musky, and fragrant, they were often grown in the same plots as cucumbers and considered their cousins in both flavor and temperament. While cucumbers cooled, the body melons were said to elevate the spirit. A famous physician of the time claimed that melon flesh brings joy to the chest and lightness to the limbs, except when overripe, in which case it invites chaos. It's unclear whether he meant digestive chaos or emotional turmoil, but we can all agree overripe melon is a betrayal. You pass a ring of stones marking what may have been a melon tasting circle. Someone once sat here cross-legged with a bronze knife in one hand and a wedge of honeydew in the other. You imagine a sun-warmed afternoon, the juice sticky on fingertips, laughter bubbling up between bites. One inscription nearby records a yearly melon duel between two noble families, the House of Keshan and the House of Marvdasht. Each presented their finest fruit to the court. The stakes, regional prestige, and once a minor gold mine. The winner's melon was said to be as sweet as a bride's sigh. The losers like chewing wet sandalwood. Brutal. These competitions weren't just culinary sport, they were deeply tied to identity pride and even diplomacy. Offering your guest a cucumber from your province was a statement. A melon served to a visiting dignitary, That was flattery, and also a flex. Some scholars believe the intensity of these rivalries led to a kind of agricultural Cold War. Farmers secretly developed irrigation hacks, soil treatments, and even selective breeding techniques to one-up their rivals. While we don't have blueprints for ancient greenhouses, we do know they used reflective stones to trap heat and shelter rows of vegetables. In essence, early cucumber tech. No LED grow lights required. You lean against a toppled pillar cucumber vines curling along its base like lazy serpents. The wind is softer here, and the air smells faintly of sweetgrass and something almost citrusy. You imagine plucking a fat, spiky cucumber from a trellis, wiping it on your sleeve and biting in. Crunchy, a little bitter, ancient. In that moment, the past doesn't feel so far away. It feels fresh, and maybe ready to sprout again. You stretch your legs as you rise from the cucumber plot, brushing off bits of leaf and dust, as if you'd been dining at a vegetable-themed gala. The moon has shifted again, inching higher above the cracked bones of the old garden walls. You follow its cool light toward a small stone structure that might have once been a herbarium, or perhaps a humble kitchen annex. Whatever it was, it smells oddly like garlic. You squint into the darkness and step inside. The air in here is thick with something potent. Not the gentle whisper of mint or basil, but a sharp nose-punching aroma that hits you square in the sinuses. Garlic, lots of it, dried and braided in long strands overhead, as if whoever last visited never wanted to run out. It's a garlic cave, and your eyes water in reverence. Now, to modern taste, garlic is a culinary essential. But back in ancient Persia, garlic wasn't just food, it was fame. It was fire. It was folklore. It was well-divisive. Persian cooks used garlic with reckless joy, tossing cloves into broths, mashing it into pastes, and even fermenting it into what we'd now call black garlic, although they probably didn't know that aging it for weeks in warm clay ovens was unlocking all kinds of umami. The Persians believed garlic had protective powers. It warded off illness, evil spirits, and possibly judgmental mother-in-laws. But not everyone shared their enthusiasm. There's a particularly juicy story involving a diplomatic dinner between a Persian prince and an ambassador from a garlic-averse culture, possibly early Greeks or Egyptians. The Persians, proud of their kitchen prowess, served a feast laced with so much garlic, the visiting diplomat reportedly fainted into a bowl of lentils. The incident nearly sparked a trade dispute. Historians still argue whether it was a legitimate reaction or diplomatic drama to avoid eating eggplant. Back outside the hut, you find a stone mortar and pestle still stained deep ochre from turmeric and garlic blending. You can almost hear the rhythmic grind of the pestle as some ancient chef worked late into the night, humming a tune and preparing a garlic-heavy sauce for the next morning's breakfast flatbreads. And yes, they ate garlic for breakfast, with yogurt, mint, and soft cheese, all wrapped in warm lavash. Brave souls. You walk a little farther and stumble literally upon a fallen amphora, cracked and leaking what appears to have once been garlic oil. The scent is still there, faint but unmistakable. This wasn't just cooking oil. It was likely used as a salve rubbed into the skin to ward off illness, improve circulation, or depending on who you asked, strengthen the spirit. One medical scroll claimed it could open the chest to clearer breath and lighter dreams. You suspect it more likely opened the window as your bed partner fled for fresher air. Nearby is a slab of black stone with faint engravings mostly illegible. But one line stands out, just visible under your fingertips. Let not thy breath shame thy lineage. A reminder that garlic's benefits didn't always outweigh its social consequences. There were etiquette rules about it. In some courtly circles, garlic was banned before royal audiences or religious rites. Servants reportedly had garlic days off before ceremonial appearances to air out their breath. That's right, garlic sabbaticals. Imagine explaining that on a time card. You move along nose still tingling to a small terraced plot tucked into the edge of the old garden. Wild garlic still grows here, tiny and fierce, sprouting defiantly among the stones. You kneel beside it and admire the purple-tinged stems, the papery skins catching moonlight like miniature lanterns. This strain looks old, far older than the modern bloated bulbs we now see in supermarkets. It's closer to its wild cousin, tougher, spicier, and rumored to be so strong it could awaken the lion within a lamb. And yet garlic wasn't always taken seriously. Some ancient scholars considered it crude, a peasant's seasoning. Others saw it as sacred. There's a debate carved in side-by-side tablets, one arguing for garlic's divine properties, the other calling it a blight upon sweet breath. One tablet even includes an illustration of a man shielding his nose with a fig leaf. Ancient shade immortalized in stone. As you rise and walk onward, you can't help but marvel at garlic's journey. From wild sprigs in mountain crevices to royal kitchens, from healing salves to social sabotage. It was a staple, a statement, and occasionally a scandal. And here's something quirky ancient Persians weren't content to just use garlic on themselves, they fed it to their animals. Not all animals, just the ones they thought needed a little extra divine fire. War horses were sometimes fed garlic to inflame their courage. Whether this worked is debatable, but one can only imagine the battlefield smelled like a pizza oven with hooves. A soft rustling in the bushes makes you pause. You half expect a goat to emerge wearing a garlic necklace and a crown. But no, it's just wind shaking the branches of a nearby fig tree. Even that smells faintly garlicky now. You chuckle. It's seeped into your clothes, your hair, your soul. You are garlic now. You are powerful. With the scent still swirling around you, you make your way out of the herb annex, trailing echoes of pungent joy behind you. The night is cooler now, but the heat from the garlic hut lingers like the warm ember of a well-cooked stew. Somewhere long ago, a chef would have smiled at you, eyes watering, nose running, but proud of the meal, proud of the bite. The garlic clings to you like a spicy ghost as you slip away from the herb annex and return to the night air. A low breeze brushes your cheek cooler now, as if the moon itself decided to exhale. And in that breath, you catch a different scent, less fiery than garlic, more mellow, earthy, slightly sweet. You follow it step by step until you find yourself standing before a sunken bed carved into the slope of a low terrace. Nothing grows there now, but a small placard lies embedded in the rock nearby, weathered by time, but still legible in old Persian script. It reads, "Root of Kings," not orange but bold. You kneel beside the bed and reach into the soil, your fingers tracing the grooves left by ancient hands. This was where the carrot lived, just not the one you know, because the carrot, as it turns out, wasn't always orange. In ancient Persia, it was purple. Deep, royal purple. Sometimes red or even yellow, but orange. That came much, much later, thanks to the Dutch, their patriotism, and a wildly successful plant breeding campaign that literally colored your fridge drawer forever. The ancient Persian carrot, or zardak, was denser, more fibrous, and boasted a flavor closer to parsnip, with a hint of spice. It was often cooked into stews paired with prunes, and stewed slowly until it surrendered its bold color into the sauce. You picture a pot bubbling with lamb-dried apricots, and these royal purple roots swirling into golds and wine tones. Sweet, savory, and definitely dramatic. One scholar called Persian cuisine a rainbow cooked in grief, which sounds poetic until you realize they meant it literally, because so many ingredients were deeply pigmented. Carrots, beets, limes, saffron, all lending their hues to stories on a plate. And nowhere did this matter more than at funerary banquets where meals were prepared in colors meant to represent the soul's passage. The purple carrot. That was for memory. Bitter memory softened by time. You sit back on your heels and close your eyes, letting your other senses stretch across the millennia. You hear chopping wooden blades, slicing root vegetables on figwood boards. You hear the hiss of boiling broth, the scrape of pottery lids, a voice muttering something about too much cumin again. You smile. Even ancient kitchens had critics. And here's where it gets quirky. Some records suggest carrots were used not only for food, but for ink. Mixed with other roots and a little acid, the pigment could produce a ruddy purple dye that scribes occasionally used when royal decree required a little visual flair. Imagine it a law written in carrot. A royal punishment announced in root-based calligraphy. Historians still argue whether this counts as bureaucracy or cuisine. Back on your feet, you follow the edge of the bed to a small irrigation channel, dry now, but once a thriving lifeline for every root in the garden. The channels were hand-dug, lined with clay tiles, and occasionally filled with fish, which doubled as pest control and protein source. More importantly, the careful watering of carrots was a point of pride. Overwater, and they'd split. Underwater, and they'd taste woody. The ideal texture, like softened bone, according to one garden manual from the Sasanian era. Slightly disturbing, but oddly specific. And yet, despite all the care and reverence, the purple carrot eventually disappeared from Persian tables. No one knows exactly why. Some blame climate shifts. Others suggest the orange version brought later through trade simply became more popular due to its milder flavor and color consistency. Whatever the reason, the royal root faded into obscurity. But it had its moment. Oh, did it shine! At one royal wedding detailed in an illuminated scroll now lost to history, but quoted by later poets, the bride's dowry included 20 crates of violet carrots pickled in lime and rose. She wept not from sorrow, but from gratitude, and possibly from the vinegar fumes. A lesser-known lyric in that poem, her lips were as red as carrot wine, her glance sharp as clove, her love tasted of cumin and root. Somebody had it bad. And the thing is, purple carrots weren't only for nobles. They were grown in village plots, traded in bustling markets, and even fermented into a kind of proto-kvass, a mildly fizzy drink said to restore the color of joy to pale cheeks. Probably not FDA approved, but the sentiment holds. As you circle back toward the path, you notice something in the dirt, a tiny withered seed darker than the rest. You lean down, cupping it in your palm. Carrot seed. Possibly. They're notoriously small, easy to lose. Ancient gardeners would sometimes plant them mixed with sand or dusted in flour just to track them more easily. And maybe, just maybe, this little survivor has been waiting. Waiting for the right moon, the right warmth, the right wanderer. You place the seed gently back in the soil, pressing it down with your fingertip. A small act. Quiet. Like folding a letter you'll never send. One last glance at the carrot bed reveals a mosaic fragment poking from the dirt. You clean it off. It shows a hand reaching toward a bushy plant root still half buried. The hand is graceful, the fingers long, and next to it a word etched in curling script, Yad, memory. And now the root remembers you too. The memory of that violet carrot lingers as you make your way along a winding trail, the air thick with the scents of old leaves and iron-rich dust. The moon overhead plays hide-and-seek behind thin, whispering clouds. Somewhere to your left, a cicada clicks slow, lazy, like it's half asleep too. And then quite suddenly the scent changes. It hits you like a puff of perfume that's been sitting in a drawer for a few thousand years, slightly bitter, deeply vegetal, with a hint of roasted something. You stop sniff again, and then smile. Eggplant. And not just any eggplant. This part of the garden belonged to the Solanum family ancestors of the sleek, purple fruit you now find smothered in miso glaze or trapped inside soggy parmesan. But back then, the eggplant was wild, unpredictable, and occasionally controversial. You descend a few steps into what was once a sunken kitchen garden. The remnants of trellises still rise like skeletal hands from the earth. Here, eggplants once grew plump and pear-shaped, though not always purple. Ancient Persian eggplants came in pale green, bright white striped lavender, and occasionally a yellowish hue so suspiciously suggestive that one scholar referred to it as culinarily flirtatious. Because, yes, let's talk about the innuendo, the eggplant's silky flesh, weighty form, and let's say suggestive profile earned it a racy reputation in more than one culture. Persian poets sometimes used it as metaphor, half food, half flattery, and occasionally full-on seduction. One half-lost lyric describes a woman's lips as an eggplant stewed in longing, which sounds squishy. But in context, it was probably a compliment. Still, not everyone loved the eggplant. Some physicians of the time accused it of drawing dark humors into the belly, warning that overconsumption could cause melancholy inflammation or, most dramatically, visions of darkness during daylight. Others, however, swore it sharpened memory and gave men dreams filled with ripe promises. Historians still argue whether the eggplant's polarizing profile was culinary medical or just psychological projection. You kneel down near a cracked irrigation channel. A few thin vines still cling to life, their leaves spotted, their fruit long gone. But the soil smells right. Rich, fertile. You can almost hear the sizzling oil, the hiss of a clay pan, as eggplant slices hit the heat. Back then they might have been fried in sesame oil, salted heavily to draw out bitterness, then mashed with yogurt, garlic, and mint. A dish whose descendants live on today in Kashke Badamyan, though the ancient version may have been even funkier fermented yogurt, aged onions, and a splash of sour grape must. And the thing is, eggplants were sometimes feared not for their flavor, but for their ability to change form. Left uncooked, they were bitter, astringent. But roasted or fried, they became silk, cream, luxury in vegetal form. The transformation was considered alchemical, even suspicious. One philosopher warned that a food that could change so much under fire might carry deception in its flesh, a backhanded compliment if ever there was one. You walk past a low wall and find a row of faded frescoes. Here a banquet scene, women reclining on cushions, sharing a shallow dish. In the center, a glossy, dark shape that could only be a roasted eggplant split and steaming. A servant stands nearby with a small cup likely filled with sour yogurt or pomegranate molasses for drizzling. It's hard to believe how much elegance could be summoned from a plant many cultures once called mad apple. That nickname, by the way, traveled west along with the eggplant, whispering into Roman ears that the fruit might cause madness. Why? Because anything that tasted that rich without being meat had to be suspicious, or possibly magical, or possibly both. The Persians didn't worry much about that. They'd already written poems about it, and everyone knows once a food gets a poem, it's here to stay. You pause to examine a stone basin filled with dried seeds. Among them are the pale oval eggplant seeds, papery and unassuming. Some farmers of the time soaked these in diluted vinegar before planting, believing it would temper their fire. Others preferred to chant short blessings over them, something between farming and incantation. After all, anything that could transform so radically from raw to rich deserved a little respect, or a little fear. Nearby, tucked into the corner of a crumbled wall, you spot a small tablet barely more than a palm's size. On it, scratched in uneven script, she fed me nightshade, and I loved her more. A love letter, a warning, or just a cook's journal entry after a particularly strong batch of eggplant stew. And here's a quirky tidbit. Eggplants were sometimes used in makeup, crushed into a paste with rose water and applied to cheeks or lips for a purple tint, ancient contouring, basically. One empress reportedly refused to use anything else, claiming it gave her the hue of midnight and mystery. You continue your stroll through the rows, imagining each plant, each dish, each awkward dinner date where someone probably said, "Wait, is this eggplant or dream?" and didn't get a clear answer. As you turn to leave, the wind shifts, and you swear you hear a whisper like oil crackling or a spoon scraping the bottom of a clay pot. You smile. Somewhere long ago, a cook stirred an eggplant stew that made someone fall in love, or maybe just nap peacefully for an hour. Either way, that's a kind of magic. You walk on with the scent of roasted nightshade trailing softly behind you, silky and strange. By now your path has twisted and turned through every corner of this ghostly Persian garden, past garlic's fiery secrets, carrots dressed in royal purple, and eggplants whispering mischief. You pause beside a low stone wall, its surface cool against your hand, and catch the faintest trace of something unexpected. Cilantro. Sharp, citrusy, polarizing. The kind of scent that slices through memory like a dagger through a silk sleeve. For some, it evokes freshness. For others, well, let's just say it tastes like soap, and no amount of historical reverence will change that. But in ancient Persia, cilantro was more than garnish. It was currency. It was spell work. It was gossip. You step over the broken lip of what once might have been a market stall, its stone base still etched with faint carvings of herbs, vines, and tiny amphorae. This was the herb market, not the massive kind for grain and textiles, but the intimate kind where sellers knew their customers by name, and where rumors traveled faster than coin. In this place, the herb market oracle reigned. That's what they called her, though her real name is lost to time. She was no royal, no scholar, not even a scribe. Just an older woman who sold bundles of fresh herbs wrapped in fig leaves, leaning against a crooked stall with a basket at her feet, and a twinkle in her eye sharp enough to dice shallots. But oh, she knew everything, and everyone. And if you wanted to know what political faction was rising, what noble marriage was on the rocks, or whether the moon favored planting basil that week, you came to her, and you bought her cilantro, because her cilantro, according to legend, never wilted. It stayed fragrant for weeks, curled gently like a sleeping cat, and tasted of rain on the first day of spring. No one knew how she did it. Some claimed she whispered to her herbs as she gathered them by moonlight. Others suspected she kept them in clay jars lined with charred olive pits and salt. One scroll even accuses her playfully of bribing the gods with rose syrup. Historians still argue whether she was a culinary genius or just really, really good at drying leaves. You wander through the broken rows of vendor stalls, some still marked with painted signs. Mint, tarragon, fenugreek, rue, and of course coriander, the seed form of cilantro, round and citrusy, used in spice rubs and digestive teas. The Persians adored it. They steeped it in wine, crushed it into face balms, even scattered it in bedding to summon sweet dreams and gentle thoughts. You wonder if it worked. You wonder if anyone accidentally summoned a minty nightmare instead. In the center of the market, a small stone seat faces east. Locals say this was the oracle's spot. From here, she could see everything: the nobles in disguise buying fever few, the cooks arguing over which parsley was flat enough, the young lovers exchanging bundles of thyme tied with string. And occasionally she'd murmur something quietly, like, "The vizier's wife will ask for dill tomorrow," and it would turn out to be true. Creepy a little, useful absolutely. You sit on her stone and gaze out, imagining the crowd bustling around you. The clang of copper pans, the rustle of linen robes, the sharp slap of a haggler's final offer. Somewhere a child giggles after sneaking a sprig of mint from an unattended stall. Somewhere else, a soldier in full armor asks nervously if fennel helps with breath. And amidst it all, cilantro. Piles of it, bundles tied with red twine, crates overflowing, a mountain of green gossip. What makes it especially fun is this cilantro seeds were sometimes used as love tokens, carved with tiny symbols traded secretly or tossed into wines for a spirited evening. One court musician reportedly swallowed a handful before each performance, claiming it gave him tongue like honey and memory like eagle. He also once collapsed during a flute solo, so moderate usage, folks. Some early texts also mention cilantro as an ingredient in clarity sachets, little pouches worn around the neck during tense debates or legal trials. Supposedly they helped the wearer stay sharp, eloquent, and slightly smug. Modern science has no opinion on this. Yet. A breeze picks up, and dry leaves skitter across the stone like whispers. You feel as if the oracle is still nearby, just out of sight, watching you, chuckling softly. Maybe she's still waiting for you to ask a question. Or maybe she already knows the answer. You reach down into a crack in the market floor and pull out a small, smooth stone. No bigger than a grape, etched faintly into its surface is a single-leaf symbol, cilantro unmistakably. A lucky charm, a forgotten coin, or just one more whisper in a garden that remembers everything. You tuck it into your pocket and rise. As you leave the herb market behind, you notice something peculiar. You smell mint, then dill, then hyssop. It's as if the garden knows you're paying attention. Or maybe it's just the wind stirring the stories again. Either way, one thing is clear. The herbs are listening. You leave the market stalls behind your pockets, still perfumed with imaginary herbs, and a pebble that somehow feels warmer than it should. The path narrows now, twisting through crooked trees and half-buried stones. Here the air is quieter, less social, more secretive. You follow a slight incline to a clearing hemmed in by overgrown thorn bushes. In the center lies a stone hatch, lifted just enough to catch the moonlight. You nudge it open. Welcome to the dried pea vault. Or at least that's what it was once called, more formally a grain cistern. But rumor, as it tends to do, reshaped the space into something more conspiratorial. According to fragmentary records and a few extremely dramatic poems, this was no ordinary pantry. This was where the dried pea conspiracy took root. You descend the shallow steps into a cool chamber, its walls lined with dusty clay jars. The temperature drops, and so does your voice, though you're not sure why. Something about this room demands whispers. Maybe it's the smell, a mix of dry soil, ancient starch, and the faintest whiff of cumin. Or maybe it's the history. Here's what we know. Dried legumes, especially peas, lentils, and chickpeas were essential to the Persian diet. They kept well-traveled far, and could be transformed into everything from hearty stews to pastes to surprisingly convincing meat substitutes. What we don't entirely know is how, somewhere along the line, they became tools of political resistance. The story goes that in the waning years of a particular dynasty, historians disagree, which there was unrest among the lower ranks of court staff, cooks, scribes, stable hands, and pantry keepers. These weren't revolutionaries in the traditional sense, but they were fed up, pun fully intended, with rising food taxes, shrinking rations, and mandatory eggplant Fridays. And so they started stockpiling. Not weapons, not gold, dried peas. Why peas? Because they were cheap, portable, and versatile. Also because their official tallies were rarely audited, no one was going to count each pea. And so they were hidden. In baskets labeled soap inside hollow reeds, even baked into hardened flatbread to be broken apart and rehydrated later. These secret caches became currency in an underground barter system used to support what one scribe poetically called the quiet rebellion of the kitchen. A ledger fragment unearthed near Susa contains a curious entry, 4 sacks lentil 3 of P1 of loyalty. Historians still argue whether this was literal metaphorical, or code for we're about to yeet a ladle at the high steward. You run your fingers along one of the jars and pop the lid. Inside, a handful of shriveled peas rattles softly. They're beige, some freckled, some split. Nothing impressive until you remember that each one may have fueled something bigger. A secret meeting, a hidden meal, a coded message delivered in soup form. Peas were also surprisingly advanced in ancient agriculture. Persian farmers practiced early forms of seed selection, rotating crops to refresh soil and achieve better yields. One treatise, half legible and wildly passionate, describes the ideal sphere of the noble pea as smooth as wisdom and firm as resolve. You suspect the writer had one too many bowls of legume stew and a flair for dramatics. You make your way deeper into the vault, where torch brackets line the walls and inscriptions whisper stories. One particularly vivid carving shows a woman holding out a bowl to a child, a smile on her face. The child reaches in not for candy, but for peas. Underneath is etched, "From these the day begins." It's unclear whether this was literal nourishment or metaphorical fuel for resistance. Possibly both. And here's a quirky twist: peas were used as secret weights. Hollow clay statues filled with peas acted as balancing tools in underground trade markets. Want to make sure someone didn't cheat you at the scales? Count the peas afterward. It wasn't foolproof, but it was suspicious enough to make most would-be swindlers behave. You pause by a slab of rock that seems out of place. You press your palm against it, and it shifts slightly, revealing a hidden niche. Inside, a shallow bowl half filled with dried peas and a stone cup. An offering, a reminder, or maybe the last serving of a quiet goodbye. And here's the fringe bit. One theory, not widely accepted, claims that the dried pea hoarders eventually formed a network of traveling cooks. They moved across the empire in disguise, carrying recipes and coded messages sewn into their aprons. One tale even says they orchestrated the downfall of a corrupt vizier by swapping his medicinal lentil poultice with a spicy chickpea mash that sent him running for 3 days straight. Spite and fiber, an ancient combination. You smile in the darkness, the cool stone walls closing in like a blanket. Who knew that peas, the humblest, roundest, driest of legumes, could be both comfort food and quiet revolution? You gather yourself and begin to ascend. The air warms, the night outside awaits, but part of you lingers in the vault, imagining the hush of voices, the scrape of bowls, the tremble of withheld laughter. When you emerge, the garden feels different. Not just old, but alive, listening, and somewhere behind you in the cool dark, the peas wait. Still round, still ready. Back in the moonlit garden, the night feels softer now, the air cooled by the hush of earth and story. You walk a winding path past fig trees with branches like curled fingers, past stones warmed from ancient suns, and come upon a low terrace where the wind shifts, carrying with it a new scent, something silky, vegetal, and strange. You stop, inhale, and smile. Okra. Yes, okra, slippery, misunderstood, and beloved by those who know. But here in ancient Persia, it wasn't just food. It was elegance, it was status, and it was poetic. You descend into the garden's southern quadrant, where stone basins still dot the ground, each once filled with fine silt and nutrient-rich river soil, carried up in woven baskets by workers who sang songs in rhythms matched to their steps. Here, okra thrived. Known then by another name, bamia, it was praised for its resilience, its abundance, and its curious texture, which the Persian poets likened to silk unraveled by the moon. You reach down and rub your fingers in the soil. It's lighter here, looser, perfect for roots that don't want to fight their way down. The garden beds are framed with tile fragments, glazed blue-white and green, some decorated with curling vines, others with what looks like stylized okra pods in bloom. Not exactly the vegetable you'd expect to be immortalized in pottery, but Persia was always full of surprises. Here's what made okra special. It could grow in heat, survive drought, and fruit quickly. It was the people's food, yes, but also found its way into royal kitchens, braided into lamb stews, and gently fried with saffron oil. And then there's the scandal. Because apparently, a certain court poet once wrote a love letter using okra seeds arranged into lines on a plate. He presented it to a noblewoman during a midsummer feast. She, unaware of the romantic coding, casually dumped the seeds into her soup. The poor man fainted. When he awoke, his only words were, "My sonnet." Devoured. Historians still argue whether this was the first case of okra-induced heartbreak or merely poor table manners. You walk between the rows, imagining the tall stalks, heavy with fuzzy pods, swaying in the warm air. In the mornings, their flowers would open pale yellow, delicate like silk handkerchiefs, and by evening they'd close again, shy and spent. The Persians took this rhythm seriously. Some believed harvesting okra in the evening made it less slimy. Others insisted it had to be picked during a full moon to retain its dream-thinning qualities. This allegedly meant it could calm nightmares, or cause them, depending on who you asked. The science, let's call it, interpretive. Now, for something quirky, okra wasn't just eaten. Its mucilage, that infamous goo, was used as a binding agent in ancient inks and glues. One military engineer even experimented with using it to waterproof tent seams. It worked briefly, until the rain came, and the whole camp smelled faintly of soup. You sit on a flat stone that may have once been a washing bench for vegetables, where okra would be trimmed, sliced, salted, and left in the sun. The slices, when dried, curled into tiny spirals that looked like calligraphy. Children collected them. Some even wore them as necklaces. One inscription mentions a child named Shirin, who strung okra rings as beads and refused to eat them unless they told a story. That's the thing about Persian gardens. Nothing here was just functional. Every plant had multiple lives, as food, as medicine, as symbol, as charm. Okra in particular was said to promote clarity of voice. Singers were known to drink okra water steeped overnight in copper bowls, claiming it gave them tongues like glass and breath like breeze. Whether it worked or not is unclear, but let's agree, it sounds better than gargling olive oil. You pass a low structure near the back of the terrace, a clay oven long cold. On its side is etched a small verse, from pod to page, from pan to poem. A reminder that even the slipperiest vegetable could leave a mark. And here's a little-known detail: okra seeds were roasted and ground into a coffee-like drink. Slightly bitter, earthy, and allegedly useful for stirring sluggish moods. You imagine a scribe or cook sipping okra seed brew before facing another long scroll of recipes or palace menus. Whether it worked or not, it probably kept them too busy chewing to complain. As you rise, the breeze carries one last secret. A line from a forgotten song, half sung, half whispered, "Soft pod, soft heart, stir, slow, speak true." Maybe that was the garden's real lesson all along. You walk on okra silk trailing behind you in the wind. The wind is changing again, slipping cooler across your skin, now brushing through the garden like fingers sifting flour. You follow it as it snakes between crumbling walls and along shadowed terraces until it pulls you toward a curious clearing. The air here feels different, charged, if that makes sense. The kind of place where you might expect to see an old, wise woman reading the future in a bowl of fava beans. And in a way, that's exactly what used to happen here. Welcome to the vegetable zodiac. Yes, you heard right. In ancient Persia, astronomy wasn't just for star-gazing royals and calendar makers. It was a vital guide for agriculture. But sometimes the lines between science and story blurred just enough to let vegetables sneak into the stars. You stop before a faded stone ring, 12 tiles around a cracked central platform. Each tile shows a different symbol, some obvious like a beet or a leek. Others more abstract, a cluster of lentils shaped like a crescent moon or a stylized onion with radiating rings. This was no ordinary planting guide. It was a sabzi chakra, a vegetable horoscope. Now, whether the farmers really believed it or just liked having something to blame when their carrots flopped is up for debate. But many truly aligned their planting, harvesting, even cooking rituals to the cycles of stars and moon phases. Historians still argue whether these charts were devotional tools or just clever agricultural mnemonics. But the idea was simple: the heavens affected the earth. And if you understood that relationship, you could grow better vegetables. You kneel beside the tile for the month of Anarwind, represented by a wild fennel sprouting from a crescent. It was said that those born under this sign were sharp-tongued, quick-witted, and prone to over-seasoning. They favored light soups, sweet herbs, and only trusted horoscopes that told them what they wanted to hear. Nearby is the tile for Termoon, symbolized by a coiled turnip. It marked a time of grounding and rest root vegetable season. People born under Termoon were believed to be stubborn, but dependable with a love for stews and a habit of hoarding garlic. And then there was Leekspire, perhaps the most dramatic of the lot. Legend has it those born under the sign of the leek were destined for noisy kitchens, multiple love affairs, and occasional public debates over cumin ratios. You chuckle? It's absurd. And yet, isn't there a little comfort in thinking your destiny might be tied to the temperament of a beet? The vegetable zodiac extended beyond birthdays. Certain foods were said to harmonize better under specific lunar alignments. If you cooked lentils under a waxing moon, they would bring prosperity. If you boiled spinach during a solar eclipse, it might invite clarity, or, according to one chef, stomach cramps. Either way, cooking became a kind of ritual theater with vegetables as actors and the sky as script. You wander past the ring and into a nearby alcove, lined with painted scrolls, their colors barely holding on after centuries of wind and sun. One depicts a family gathered around a clay table, each person with a vegetable carved into their bread. A festive meal, yes, but also a reflection of the zodiac. You were expected to eat your sign on New Year's, preferably roasted with pomegranate glaze. Some of the vegetable signs had personality traits, of course. Parsley was cheerful but unreliable. Chickpeas were dreamy, poetic, and disorganized. Radishes were intense, emotional, and always a little spicy. People even used the signs for matchmaking. She's a pumpkin. He's an onion never going to work. Or worse, 2 cucumbers recipe for disaster. There's something charming in it, though, this idea that the earth and the stars conspired together to season your fate. That maybe your entire romantic future depended on the alignment of Saturn and a particularly sassy head of cabbage. But not everyone loved the zodiac. Certain scholars dismissed it as garden theater, while others leaned into its magic. One priest reportedly refused to officiate weddings unless the couple's vegetable signs were gastronomically compatible. Another famously wore a leek pendant for luck, which once fell into a ceremonial soup and caused a brief theological panic. You pause by a sundial etched with both zodiac signs and planting instructions. It reads, "When the beet casts its shadow north, seek time. When the onion weeps beneath the west, stir slowly and do not fear." Whether metaphor or recipe, you're not sure. But you like it. A lot. And here's a curious twist: modern-day farmers in some rural parts of Iran still consult lunar calendars for planting. They don't call it a zodiac, of course, but the roots of the practice linger. Quiet traditions that echo something ancient, perhaps more wisdom than whimsy after all. You stand in the center of the ring, the cracked vegetable symbols circling you like a faded constellation. For a moment you imagine looking up not at stars, but at a sky shaped like an enormous soup pot, with galaxies made of saffron and garlic and parsnips. What's your sign tonight? Maybe it's okra? You step lightly from the zodiac ring, your footsteps quiet against the worn flagstones. The garden is fully hushed now, cloaked in that midnight lull that feels deeper than silence. The stars above seem to lean in listening as you follow a trail bordered by faint scorch marks and the crumbled outlines of old clay pits. The scent hits you before the sight does smoke, sweet char, something roasted and primal. You've arrived at the fire-roasted festival grounds. In ancient Persia, midsummer wasn't just another warm night. It was a full sensory explosion part, harvest celebration part, purification ritual part, neighborhood barbecue with philosophical undertones. And here, in this very clearing, they lit the great fires, tossed in the vegetables, and danced in the smoke. At the heart of it all was the fire pit. You approach its remains now, just a circular depression, lined with fire-blackened stone, half filled with ash and thyme. The pit would have been lit just before dusk, fed with aromatic woods, juniper, pomegranate branches, cedar. Not just for heat, but for flavor. As the flames rose, so did the anticipation. This wasn't just about cooking. It was about transformation. The star of the feast, fava beans. Yes, humble fava beans. But in this context, they wore crowns. Soaked overnight, then tossed straight into the embers with coarse salt and wild thyme, they emerged blistered, smoky, and buttery within. But more importantly, they were symbolic. You see, in Persian lore, fava beans were associated with cleansing of body, of spirit, of social awkwardness accumulated over a long winter. They were also associated with prophecy. You'd crack one open, eat it, and then speak your truth. That was the rule. And then there were the masks. Oh yes, people wore vegetable masks. Imagine it clay or leather masks shaped like onions, garlic bulbs, eggplants. Children ran around with carrot noses. Elders wore beet crowns. And the bravest or most chaotic donned the feared fava face, a solemn-looking bean mask said to ward off droughts and boring party guests. The festival was loud. Musicians played reed flutes and goatskin drums. Dancers swirled in long robes embroidered with embroidered chili peppers and marigolds. And in the midst of it all, the vegetables roasted on sticks in clay pots, buried beneath coals, even tucked inside leaves, and nestled beside hot stones. Some recipes were traditional, others experimental. One particularly daring chef attempted a 7-flame turnip technique involving rotating root vegetables through 7 separate fire zones, each flavored with a different herb. The result charred to oblivion, but memorable. Here's something quirky. One poem from the time describes a guest who brought a goose to the festival, intending to roast it, but it was promptly adopted by the children named Parsley and dressed in a tiny cabbage tunic. It survived the night. Barely. You wander to a smaller pit where side dishes were prepped. Clay pans would have been placed on hot stones, slowly simmering lentils and shallots, or caramelizing squash in date molasses. You imagine the scent, a sweetness that clings to your clothes for days and makes you wake up hungry just from the memory. Nearby, a low stone bench marks the storyteller's spot. Every year, as the flames died down, someone, usually the oldest cook, would step forward and recite the chronicle of the missing spice. It was a long, meandering tale about a dish ruined by the forgetfulness of a cook who left out a single pinch of coriander. The lesson: never underestimate the small things, or possibly don't let your cousin near the spice rack unsupervised. Historians still argue whether the festival was religious, cultural, or just a very enthusiastic potluck with spiritual overtones. Some tablets suggest it honored the fire deity Atar. Others say it predated formal religion altogether and was more about agricultural gratitude. But all agree it was loud, joyful, and smelled amazing. As you explore the edges of the clearing, you stumble upon a small, soot-stained stone. You brush it off. A faint carving reveals what looks like a goat wearing a hat and chewing a scroll. Ah, yes, the infamous goat of the flame. According to local legend, one particularly chaotic festival ended when a ceremonial goat escaped its tether, raided the cook's scroll satchel, and ate 3 entire recipes before anyone noticed. The result: improvised dishes, experimental flavor combos, and one surprisingly delicious eggplant honey mustard soup that's never been replicated because no one remembered how they made it. The goat naturally became a kind of folk hero. A statue was erected. Songs were sung, and from that year forward all fire-roasted festivals began with a toast to the goat who edits. You stand in the center of the pit, now eyes closed, listening. The crackle of flames, the hum of voices, the sizzle of oil, the clink of clay lids. It's not gone, just folded into the ground. And somewhere under your feet lies a scorched garlic bulb that once flavored an entire room's worth of laughter. You step out of the pit shoes dusted with ash and leave a trail of imaginary smoke behind you. You follow the curling trail of phantom smoke away from the festival grounds, your steps, now light, almost buoyant, as if the fire's joy has worked its way into your bones. The wind hums low, rustling the dry leaves along the garden path like a soft drum roll. And then the scent shifts again, rich, jammy, a little wild. You pause beneath a crooked mulberry tree whose ancient roots curl over the stones like sleeping serpents. Ah, mulberries. If eggplant was the flirt and garlic, the firebrand mulberries were the drama queens of the ancient Persian pantry. Sweet, dark, and moody, perfect fruit for a royal scandal. And yes, there was a scandal. You step beneath the tree and spot a cracked tile embedded in the earth. It bears a delicate design, 2 intertwined mulberry branches, their berries dripping like teardrops. Below them, in barely legible script, the crown was stained, and so was pride. That's how the story begins. It was during the reign of a lesser-known prince, let's call him Ardashir, though historians still argue whether he was real, imagined, or just really good at marketing fruit. Ardashir ruled a small but fertile province famed for its mulberries, They were enormous, nearly black, and said to taste like poetry written in syrup. Naturally, the prince was quite proud of them. Too proud. One season another province sent word their mulberries had surpassed Ardashir's. Larger, juicier, and harvested during a lunar eclipse. A power move, horticulturally speaking. Ardashir was not amused. What followed was a fruit feud that spiraled wildly out of control. He banned all foreign mulberries from his court. Poets were commissioned to write odes comparing his berries to moonlight silk and victorious cavalry. Royal chefs were instructed to create an all-mulberry menu that culminated in a dessert so intense it allegedly made one nobleman weep into his robe and rethink his entire political career. The rival province, not to be outdone, retaliated by crafting a mulberry wine infused with violets and unicorn mythology. This led to a series of increasingly dramatic gifts, diplomatic snubs, and one very awkward banquet where a mulberry tart was accidentally dropped on the prince's ceremonial cloak. That cloak embroidered with gold thread and sacred passages. The stain, permanent. The fallout, delicious. You crouch by the base of the tree and find a piece of old ceramic, a shard from a bowl, maybe. Faint traces of dried purple cling to its glaze. Was this the site of the great tasting, the infamous duel of the desserts, possibly? Or perhaps it was just a quiet garden where servants picked fruit before sunrise, slipping berries into their mouths and whispering gossip about royal tantrums and the price of cinnamon. Mulberries weren't just fruit. They were medicine, dye, ink, symbol. They appeared in lullabies and curses alike. When dried, they turned chewy and tart, perfect for travel snacks and sweetening sour stews. When fresh, they bled into anything they touched clothes' paper pride. One curious tablet tells of a court astrologer who refused to eat mulberries because they remember too much, which sounds ridiculous until you realize the juice does linger. And maybe so do the stories. Here's something: quirky silkworms. Mulberries were their lifeblood. Persian silk, famed across continents, was fed by these very trees. Entire groves were planted just for them. The gardeners joked that the trees had two audiences, princes and worms, and it was often unclear which one was harder to please. You find a bench, crumbled but still usable, and sit beneath the twisted canopy of the mulberry tree. Above, a few stubborn berries cling to bare branches. They glow faintly in the moonlight like tiny wine-dark stars. And you think mulberries caused a crown to be stained, but they also inspired joy. The prince's chefs, in their frenzy, invented desserts still whispered about in modern cookbooks. Mulberry paste wrapped in fig leaves, creamed barley with mulberry swirl, even an early form of sherbet churned with snow from mountain peaks and drizzled with thick, sticky juice. Imagine the moment of the first taste-cold sweet tart, a spoonful of summer frozen in time. A victory perhaps not on the battlefield, but in the mouth. You rise slowly, brushing dust from your palms. One last look at the tree where the wind rustles the leaves just so, and you could swear it sounds like laughter. Or maybe an argument about jam. Then a whisper in your ear could be the breeze could be a ghost. The berry knows even when the prince forgets. You smile, because fruit doesn't care about politics. It ripens anyway. You drift away from the mulberry grove, each step pulling you deeper into the garden's midnight heart. By now, the scents, the stories, the flavors, they're not just things you've observed. They cling to you, layered on your skin like the smoke from a campfire, soft and lingering. You follow a narrow path, flanked by low shrubs until you reach a clearing with no trees, no tiles, no monuments. Just soil, flat, dark, and quiet. But above the moon glows with golden defiance. And the air here is heavy not with ash or garlic or mulberries, but with something far finer. the faintest trace of flowers, of hay, of honey warmed just shy of caramel. You close your eyes. Saffron. This at last is where the saffron bloomed. You kneel gently and run your fingers over the dirt. Saffron is shy. It doesn't trumpet its presence like onions or eggplants. It doesn't climb or vine or burst with juice. It simply waits for autumn, then sends up slender purple flowers, each holding 3 tiny crimson threads, stigmas, if we're being precise. Those threads. That's the spice, and it's ridiculous. Ridiculous in the way only something absurdly delicate and impossibly powerful can be. It takes roughly 150 flowers to produce a single gram of saffron. Ancient Persian farmers harvested it on their knees before dawn, plucking it flower by flower by flower. And still they did it, because saffron was worth more than gold. And not just because of its taste. You see, saffron was used in cooking, yes, stirred into rice, steeped in milk, sprinkled over yogurt and citrus. But it also had stranger uses. It dyed royal robes. It perfumed baths. It was a medicine, a love charm, a sleep aid, and according to one extremely bold apothecary, a means of seeing one's truest dream. Historians still argue whether that's metaphorical or if he was just experimenting a little too freely with fermented goat's milk. You glance around the clearing. The saffron flowers are long gone, but you can see their ghosts' delicate petals barely touching the soil-red filaments, trailing like brush strokes. This was no farm. This was a saffron garden, a place for ritual, not yield. The saffron here wasn't for sale. It was for sleep. Yes, sleep, because in certain court circles it was believed that saffron consumed just before rest could trigger visions. Not just dreams, but messages, warnings, answers. The saffron dream ritual, as it's now called by the few scholars who take it seriously, involved a warm drink of saffron-infused almond milk, a whispered verse, and silence. Complete silence. No fire, no music, no speaking, just a slow sip and the waiting. You lean back, the thought of such a night pressing against your mind like a weightless curtain. What did they hope to find? A glimpse of the divine. A recipe. A chance to visit someone lost. Here's something quirky. One noblewoman reportedly dreamt an entire culinary technique after such a ritual. She awoke, wrote down instructions for stuffing quince with spiced lentils and honeyed onion, and immediately summoned the kitchen staff. The result, a new dish that became the pride of the capital. It was known as Shab-i-Zard, or Night of Gold. Coincidence, maybe. But who's to say the saffron didn't help? And saffron was political, too. Entire provinces rose and fell on its trade. Spice routes twisted around it. Wars were delayed, it said, because a shipment of saffron had not yet arrived, and the generals refused to dine on bland rice before battle. Priorities, obviously. You find a shallow bowl tucked behind a broken wall, cracked stained yellow at the rim. A saffron bowl, likely used to steep threads in warm water before being added to food or perfume. The color remains. Faint, yes, but unmistakable. Golden, like sunlight trapped in clay, and that color, it mattered. In Persian symbolism, gold was the color of immortality, not because it lasted forever, but because it lingered, like memory, like the taste of saffron rice long after the meal is done. You rise slowly and walk the edge of the clearing. The wind is soft here, as if careful not to disturb whatever dream this place still holds. You find another inscription, this one so eroded it's almost illegible. But one phrase stands out clear as flame. He who dreams in saffron wakes with purpose, a bold claim, or perhaps just a comforting thought to fall asleep to. You glance up. The stars are shifting now, scattering like spilled salt across the sky. Somewhere someone once lay on this same patch of soil, a warm saffron drink, in hand, eyelids heavy, wondering what the night would bring. You smile, because you already know. The clearing fades behind you as you walk once more beneath a canopy of stars and whispers. The garden is quieter now, the air thick with endings, but not sadness. More like something wrapping itself up, tucking its roots in for the night. You follow a gentle slope downward past a row of brittle pomegranate bushes until the path opens into a place that feels in between. A crossroads of memory. Here old trees lean closer together. Olive quince almond. Not wild, not quite cultivated. A space where the wind seems to pause and listen. This was the exile path. The final corridor through which seeds left Persia not flung with ceremony but smuggled in silence. When empires shifted and dynasties cracked, people fled. Not just nobles and warriors, but cooks, gardeners, herbalists. And they didn't go empty-handed. They took seeds, wrapped in linen, hidden in belt pouches, sewn into hems, tucked inside scrolls, smeared into pages under the guise of ink stains. Some were legal trade goods, most weren't. These weren't just foodstuffs. They were inheritance. You pause by a flat stone where a boot mark is permanently etched into clay, a strange survivor of time and pressure. Beside it, a single rusted pin shaped like a clover, perhaps once used to close a satchel that carried what cilantro seeds? Garlic cloves, dried beans. The Persians didn't just export silk and poetry, they exported flavor. Chickpeas found their way to Greece, and okra rode caravans across Africa. Eggplants went east into the stews of India. Even their misunderstood purple carrots eventually surfaced in Italy, and France, still stubborn, still proud. And wherever those seeds traveled, so did the memory of this place, of gardens engineered with qanats and moon phases, of cooks who measured time in sprigs and spice pinches, of feasts where garlic was both a blessing and a gamble. Some journeys were planned, trade routes traced like ribbons across the map, but others were desperate, chaotic. Picture a family leaving at night taking nothing but a small satchel of seeds and a pan wrapped in a shawl. No scrolls, no maps, just recipes murmured and memorized. One legend tells of a woman fleeing a burning estate, her child on one hip, and a bundle of leeks tied to her back. At the first village she reached, she planted them in a stranger's garden. The leeks thrived. Years later, the village became known for its soups, which carried a hint of something foreign, spicy, soft, comforting. People called it leek of the wind, a gift not just of flavor but of origin. You crouch beside a small wall, a remnant of a checkpoint, or perhaps a resting place. It's covered in soot-black moss. Scratched into the stone is a simple message, possibly graffiti: keep the taste. That's it. No name, no date, just that. You imagine the exiles gathering on boats, on camels, on foot, offering each other scraps of dried fruit, flatbread filled with pickled eggplant, little paper packets of spice pressed into hands, with the solemnity of a vow. No one spoke it aloud, but they all knew to carry the seed was to carry memory. And here's a quirky one. A handful of Persian coriander seeds were once found sewn into the hem of a child's burial robe in Greece. Experts puzzled over why protection preservation, one theory, suggests it was a way of marking the child's origin like a floral passport. Another theory, someone hoped that in the next life, the child would taste something sweet. You walk farther now, and the trees grow denser, shading the path like guardians. The sound of leaves underfoot feels louder here, as though the past wants to be noticed one final time. You stop at the edge of a dried stream bed and find a small pile of stones. Not random. Arranged. A traveler's cairn. You brush aside a bit of dust and find, yes, a seed. One, just one. Cracked, dull, ancient, A chickpea. What's more poetic than that? Not gold, not jewels. A legume. Round and plain and packed with survival. Boil it, mash it, roast it, grind it. Feed your family. Start a soup. Begin again. Because the story of exile isn't just loss. It's transmission. The recipes changed, yes. The names faded. But the flavors, they adapted. They whispered. They endured. And tonight, as you stand here on this trail out of Persia, you realize something beautiful. Nothing truly vanishes if someone remembers how it tasted. You turn to leave the chickpea still nestled in the hollow of your hand. A soft wind follows you. The exile path fades behind you, swallowed into darkness and dust, but the memory of it remains tucked in your palm, like that lone chickpea, small, quiet, powerful. You tread gently now, as if the garden itself is sleeping, and perhaps it is. The air grows warmer again, like a final exhale from the earth. And up ahead you see a stone archway wrapped in ivy, half collapsed but still standing. You step through it, and everything changes. This is the garden that remembers, not a place on any map, not marked in tablets or texts, just a whisper in old recipes and the silence between flavors. The soil is soft here, darker than before. The trees lean in older, their bark etched by time, and perhaps by hands that once carved recipes as blessings. You look around, and for a moment everything's still. Then it comes. The echo. It doesn't arrive as sound exactly, but as presence. A memory that doesn't belong to you curling into your mind like steam. You blink, and the garden stirs. There, a row of purple carrots sprouting despite the odds. Over there, garlic vines twisting like braids along broken walls. Eggplant leaves shimmer under moonlight, and in the distance a saffron flower blooms out of season just once defiantly. You kneel at a stone bench where someone long ago laid out vegetables to cool after roasting. The surface is smoothed by hands. A line is carved along one side. What feeds the belly is known. What feeds the soul must be remembered. It's easy to think food is just food. But here it feels different. The vegetables are more than ingredients. They're voices. The fava bean whispers laughter from the festival. The okra hums softly in silk. The mulberry carries the weight of pride and forgiveness. And the cilantro. Well, it smirks knowingly from the shadows. Still gossiping. You walk past an old fig tree, and there in its shade a pile of parchment curled and weathered but intact. Not royal decrees, not battle plans. Recipes. Some written in looping calligraphy, others scribbled by tired hands. One reads, "For days when courage is thin, lentils, tamarind, dried mint, and bread. Cook slowly. Stir with hope." Another simply says, "Use garlic, always." You smile. You keep walking deeper into the garden that remembers, and find a pond fed by an unseen spring. Its surface reflects not just the sky, but the past, shifting, reshaping. You see a child learning to mash herbs with their grandmother. A cook balancing clay pots along a burning pit. A soldier chewing on dried peas between battles. A queen smuggling saffron threads inside her ring. And there, walking slowly through it, all you. But not quite as you are now. You made of all these meals, all these stories carrying a memory stitched from flavor. You a continuation. You sit by the pond and close your eyes, not to forget, but to listen better. You hear garlic crackling. You hear the crunch of cucumbers being sliced just before noon. You hear the laugh of a storyteller whose soup always ran a little salty when he was in love. And you hear the whisper of seeds buried but never lost. The garden doesn't need tending now. It only needs remembering. You rise once more, feeling something settle in your chest, not just hunger or nostalgia, but connection. The earth knows your footsteps now. The roots know your name. As you step out through the far archway, the stars have shifted again. The moon hangs lower. The breeze carries saffron smoke and sleep. And somewhere in the garden behind you, a single fig drops gently to the soil. The garden fades behind you now like breath on a window pane, real but softening. Your body feels heavier, but not in a tired way, in a full way. Like soil warmed by sun, like bread just pulled from the oven. The wind is quieter, the earth no longer whispers. Even the stars seem content, no longer watching, just glowing faintly like scattered candlelight on a well-loved table. You carry so much more than you arrived with, not in your hands but in your senses. You know now the scent of ancient eggplant, the taste of royal carrots that never dreamed of orange, the rustle of dried peas passed hand to hand beneath suspicion and moonlight. You've walked through the old festival. Smoke felt the sting of garlic in the back of your throat and nodded politely to a goat that edited recipes by chewing them. But most of all, you've remembered. Because what we taste, we carry. What we cook, we pass on. Even when the names blur, even when the scripts fade, flavor remains. And now you rest. Let your thoughts drift like coriander seeds on a breeze. Let the saffron dreams unfold gently like silk in warm water. Let the garden linger a while longer behind your closed eyes. And if when you wake, you find yourself craving lentils or wondering about the texture of a moon-roasted fava bean good, the garden did its job. Sleep well now. You're part of the story too.